Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have death in a cage. In every part of this video series, I've talked about how public all of these punishments used to be, and this one is certainly no exception. People of the past just really liked watching people die or have pain inflicted upon them. I'm not sure what that was about, but I'm just glad I was born in this time and not then, because I would have been fainting every time I left the house. And not just because I had a cut that modern medicine wasn't around to fix. Anyway, death in a cage is, well, exactly what it sounds like. Essentially, this was just one method of execution that was extremely public, as they would strip the person down and lock them in an iron cage that was placed somewhere that everyone would be able to see. Basically, the condemned person would be locked in there with no food or water, and everyone would just watch them as they slowly died. Yeah. How messed up is that? In our number 9 spot today, we have death by elephants. There's a lot of messed up punishments we've talked about in the last few weeks, but this one makes me extra angry because why do we need to include poor innocent animals in our terrible behavior? You know, execution by elephants was quite a popular method of capital punishment in a certain part of the world. The elephants would be used to crush, dismember, or just inflict pain on captives who were being publicly executed. This method was most commonly used by royalty because it was a way that they could use the elephants to signify both the ruler's power as well as their ability to control a wild animal. This practice began to die out in the 18th and 19th century as the parts of the world that used this method began to be colonized. Elephants were the chosen animal in part because of their size and strength, but also because of their intelligence, domesticability, and versatility. Although bears and lions were more popularly used in other parts of the world, elephants had the ability to be trained to execute the person in a variety of different ways because they are so smart. I feel bad for the people who died like this, but I also feel bad for the elephants who were forced to take part in it as well. In our number 8 spot today, we have mud. In ancient times, like we know all too well at this point, people liked to watch other people die, but one of the most common favorites of the time was suffocation. During the medieval times, however, they liked to do this in their own special messed up way, and that was by using mud. Basically, according to historians, they would just throw criminals into a big thing of stinky mud and leave them there. This would eventually lead to their drowning or suffocation from the mud. Apparently, in medieval France, this cruel and unusual punishment was reserved especially for women who were unfaithful to their husbands. Yeah, I'm really glad now we can just do things like, I don't know, divorce? Just seems like a better option for everyone. In our number 7 spot today, we have trial by ordeal. This one is aptly named because it really was a whole entire ordeal, and one that I'm sure absolutely none of us would like to have been a part of. This foolproof ancient judicial practice was used as a test to determine whether someone was innocent or guilty. Spoiler alert, it was not in fact foolproof at all. In fact, it makes absolutely zero sense. Basically, the accused would be placed in the center of everyone, and then they would have severe pain inflicted upon them in a multitude of ways. If they survived the pain, they were innocent, and if they didn't, they were guilty. Like, what kind of insanity is that? Apparently there was a bunch of different ordeals people could be subjected to, like cold water, hot iron, really whatever option, they were all bad. And like, what an insane idea to test someone's innocence. I'm just saying, I know a lie detector is only 80 to 90% accurate, but I'll take that over this ordeal any day. In our number 6 spot today, we have the ducking stools. This was a punishment used in 16th and 17th century England and New England, and it was usually a punishment that was reserved for women. This punishment was given to a woman for doing what was considered unwomanly, whatever that is supposed to mean. Apparently this included things like having an argument with their husband, fighting with their neighbors, gossiping, and backstabbing. Whoever made these rules had clearly never met a man, because newsflash, everyone does literally all of those things, but hey, clearly the logic used in the past was, well, not logical. Basically, this punishment would see a woman being tied up to a stool and then dropped into a lake or stream over and over again. This was actually a punishment method that didn't usually end up in death, but that sounds like the worst consolation prize of all time. In our number 5 spot today, we have the wooden horse. This was a device that was used, and although different variations of it existed at different times in different parts of the world, the general concept was the same, and it was a punishment meant to inflict a great deal of pain. Basically, the device was a sort of wooden block, normally in the shape of a triangle with a point at the top. Whoever was having the pain inflicted upon them would be tied up and placed onto the block with a leg on either side. From there, they would have weights tied to their legs in order to slowly lower them down onto the already uncomfortable block. In later years, this punishment would be inflicted at the same time as the person was being paraded through town, usually with other humiliating punishments being inflicted on them at the same time. This method would often leave the person injured and unable to walk without pain. In our number 4 spot today, we have solitary confinement. This is a kind of punishment that still exists in our modern society, but it truly can be one of the worst punishments out there because of the kind of psychological distress it causes. Basically, this form of punishment involves a prisoner living in a single cell with little to no meaningful contact with anyone else. The isolation that solitary confinement can create can be life-altering for people. There are many stories of people being locked up for so long that they forget about their families. Some people have gone away to solitary confinement for so long, once they're let out, they no longer speak. Solitary confinement and the negative effects it has on a person is becoming a wider topic of conversation because of the effects on a person's mental well-being, and it's a common topic for a lot of human rights organizations. In our number 3 spot today, we have hamstringing. Okay, this one sounds terrible, but also just the visual this gives me in my head is enough to give me goosebumps. Hamstringing is a pretty simple concept, although extremely horrible and just disgusting, and it involves simply severing the hamstring tendons in the back of the thigh so as to incapacitate the victim. You know when you're watching basketball or football or whatever and someone tears a muscle in the game and it looks horribly painful? Yeah, this is like that, but so much worse because it's not just an accidental injury and instead someone is just being the jigsaw of the real world. Not only does this punishment restrict a person's movement greatly, but it also inflicts a great deal of pain as well, making it the double whammy of awfulness. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Iron Maiden. When I say those words, some of you might start thinking about the band, but we are talking about a very different, much more gruesome Iron Maiden today. The Iron Maiden was a popular instrument that was used in Europe in medieval times in order to inflict excruciating punishments on people. Basically, the Iron Maiden was like an iron cabinet that had large spikes inside of the doors. When someone was placed inside, some dark, twisted person could close the doors, which of course would subsequently impale the person on the inside. The doors could be closed either all the way to take the life of the person inside, or they could just be closed partially, just to ensure that pain was inflicted without taking their life. Let's just hope the trooper inside doesn't have a fear of the dark. So basically, if you see any Iron Maidens lying around, especially one with the number of the beast, you should probably run to the hills. In our number 1 spot today, we have keel hauling. This is a word that I wish I could erase from my vocabulary as it has to do with one of the most terrible punishments I've ever heard of, but I guess we've talked about 30 of these already, so I should be used to it by now. The word for this punishment comes from the Dutch word keelhalen, which apparently means to drag along the keel, and that is exactly what this terrible method was all about. This punishment was usually reserved for sailors, and they would be stripped, tied, and suspended by rope from the mast of the ship with weights tied to their legs. The rope would be looped beneath the ship so that once the tied up sailor is released, they'd be dragged under the keel of the ship. In the world of the most unsurprising news ever, this method had basically 100% fatality rate. Wow, it's almost as if you put someone in a situation that threatens their life in multiple ways, they might not survive. How strange! Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the blood eagle. This messed up thing was a ritual method of execution that was detailed in late skaldic poetry. In the 2 instances where this horrible punishment was mentioned, the victims, who both happened to be members of the royal family, were placed in the prone position. So, laying flat on their tummies, they had their ribs severed from their spine using a sharp tool, and then they had their lungs pulled out through the opening to create a sort of super messed up, really scary and terrifying pair of wings. Both instances where this insane punishment is said to have happened, the person was being punished for patricide or for killing their own father, so I guess don't do that? I'm not sure what the takeaway from this one is other than, wow, that sounds horrible, I'm glad we don't do that anymore, I really love my dad. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Pair of Anguish. I don't really like regular pears all that much, but this one definitely sounds like the worst pear probably ever. Like even worse than the one that's got brown spots all over it. The pear of anguish was also known as the choke pear or mouth pear, and I wish we could just stop here and I could let you use your own weird imagination, but we'll keep moseying on through. This torture machine consisted of a metal body that was obviously shaped like a pear normally, but it was divided into different segments, and these segments could be spread apart by the simple turning of a screw. So basically this pear would be put into any kind of orifice, like the mouth, and then it would be slowly expanded, and you see where this is going. Do I need to continue? Alright, we're done number 9. Let's keep rolling along. I'm uncomfortable already. In our number 8 spot today we have the water drip. This one, also referred to as the dripping machine, was a form of mental torture. I know some of these ones that are more psychological don't seem as bad as the horrible forms of physical punishment we've talked about, but that's not necessarily true. This punishment involved cold water which would slowly be dripped onto a person's scalp, forehead, and face for a prolonged period of time. The pattern of the drops was irregular, and because the water was cold, it was obviously quite jarring, which would cause a person's anxiety to spike as they try and anticipate the next drip. Okay, if this one wasn't gruesome enough for you, let me add one more kind of water punishment in here for good measure. We also have the forced ingestion of water, which is, exactly that. Forcing someone to drink too much water that they eventually aspirate on it or die from water intoxication, which yes, is a real thing. In our number 7 spot today we have Mazzatello. This one was a method of capital punishment that was occasionally used by the Papal States for only some of the most terrible crimes, or crimes that were considered especially loathsome. Basically, the person who was being executed would be led to a scaffold that was located in the public square because they didn't have Netflix back then, so instead they just watched people die. I don't know, it was weird. I'll keep watching Nailed It instead. But anyway, the person would be accompanied by a priest, and then on this scaffold there would be a coffin and a masked executioner who was dressed in all black. A prayer would be said for the soul of the condemned, and then when the time came, the executioner would swing a mallet into the air and then bring it down on the head of the prisoner. Sometimes this one blow would be enough to take their lives, and sometimes it would merely render them unconscious, which would then lead to their throat being cut. None of these sound good. This one sucks so bad. I feel bad giving you guys this information. Next video, can it be like top 10 nice, cool, wonderful flowers or something like that? In our number 6 spot today we have immurement. This is an unusual form of punishment, and boy, it is cruel. Maybe not quite as gruesome and gory as some of the others today, but this one would have been equally, if not more, terrifying. How am I to know? Like I said last time, how could I ever rank these in any kind of order? They're all just so bad. This is a form of imprisonment that is basically just when a person is sealed within an enclosure that has no exits. While this would surely be a very effective form of psychological torment, this is usually a method that resulted in death. Most instances included people being shut away in small confined spaces such as a coffin, and the prisoner is usually left to pass away from starvation or dehydration. This form of punishment is different from being buried alive because of how the person passes away, since being buried alive usually results in asphyxiation. Okay guys, we're close to being halfway through, we can do it. In our number 5 spot today we have necklacing. Suddenly I have a desire to never wear jewelry again after learning about this one. Necklacing is a terrifying practice that involves a rubber tire and, unfortunately, a human being, obviously. The rubber tire is filled with petrol, which is then put around the victim's chest and arms and then set ablaze. Yeah, what the heck? I feel like I'm describing a terrible, scary mob sort of a movie right now, but sadly I'm just talking about things people have actually done to each other in real life. I mean, I'm sure you can figure out what happens next, but it is said that this method can take up to 20 minutes for someone to pass away from, and they're just left suffering in the meantime. How horrible. Just like everything else on this list, and it only gets worse. Maybe? I don't know about worse, but it definitely doesn't get better. In our number 4 spot today we have molten metal. Okay, there's gotta be a point where I draw the line, right? I guess not, because you weirdos like to hear about these horribly insane punishments, and I'm here to deliver you what you want, so let's dive right into this whole batch of terrible. This absolutely skin-crawling punishment was a form of capital punishment because there is absolutely no way you'd be surviving after this. While gruesome, this punishment has a fairly simple explanation. Basically, they just poured molten metal or super hot liquid metal down the throat of the person being executed. I'll tell you what, that'll certainly do the trick. Usually during this punishment they would do things to ensure that your throat would be open during the pouring of the hot metal, and to that I have to ask, does it matter? That pain would be excruciating no matter what, but hey, people of the past loved a horrifying spectacle, so what am I to do? In our number 3 spot today we have impalement. This is another one that was highly requested by you guys, which makes me wonder, who have you been hanging out with? Vlad III, also known as Vlad the Impaler or something? Okay, that wasn't funny, but seriously, I'm a little worried about you. Anyway, this was a popular form of punishment for a long time and was most commonly used as a response to crimes against the state, although Mr. Vlad we just mentioned basically just did it to everyone he didn't like, so I suppose to each their own. Impalement was a method of both torture and execution that involved slowly driving a stake or pole or spear or hook or whatever through a person in order to completely or partially perforate the torso. You can impale someone vertically or horizontally if you want to spice it up, and don't worry, it'll suck either way. In some situations, the impaled person would then be put on display for others to see. Sometimes this was used as a warning, and other times it was just because they could. Isn't history fun? Mr. G never taught me this in grade 10. In our number 2 spot today we have drawn and quartered. Alright, you guys asked for this one, and I am nothing if not a great listener, so here we go. This was a popular form of punishment and became the statutory penalty for men who were convicted of high treason in the Kingdom of England from 1352, although this form of punishment certainly existed well before that. Basically, whoever the convicted was, they would be secured to some sort of a wooden panel and then drawn by horse to wherever this thing was going down. That wasn't said casually to make light of this horrible punishment, I'm just uncomfy, so I'm trying to keep it cool and casual. So, once at the place of execution, the person would then be hanged, almost to the point of losing their life, but from there they would be emasculated, for lack of a better term, disemboweled, beheaded, and then quartered or chopped into 4 pieces. Alright, and because this simply wasn't enough for some insane reason, the pieces would then be displayed in prominent places across the country. Like, no, I don't want to see someone's upper right quadrant while I'm going for breakfast. I'll pass on that. Thank you so much though. In our number 1 spot today we have scaphism. Alright you guys, this one is also known as the boats, or being eaten alive, or really whatever way you swing it, it absolutely sucks so badly. This is an ancient method of execution that involved putting someone sandwiched between 2 boats that are stacked on top of one another. From here they'll feed the person and cover them in milk and honey and then just leave them. From here the substances on and in the person will fester and attract bugs and other small vermin, which will then basically eat that person who can't fend for themselves alive. Not only would being eaten alive be one of the worst ways to go, but this process was incredibly lengthy and ensured the person suffered for a long time. Like, we're talking over 10 days here. In one of the first written mentions of scaphism, which comes from Plutarch, while talking about the execution of Mithridates, he said, quote, "When the man is manifestly dead, the uppermost boat being taken off, they find his flesh devoured, and swarms of such noisome creatures preying upon, and, as it were, growing to his inwards. In this way, Mithridates, after suffering for 17 days, at last expired." So yeah, anyway, if Plutarch wants to pay for my therapy after that, I think I'd be really grateful. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot we have rats. Man, this one really sums up how terrible human beings can be. Rat torture originated in ancient Rome, and ever since then it unfortunately has been part of the most horrible, gruesome punishments. What was once called a rat trap involved a man being tied down to something and then a metal enclosure being strapped to his abdomen or chest. Inside this enclosure there are rats, which the strapped down person can feel walking around, and this is when the person instilling the punishment begins heating the other end of the metal enclosure. Historically, hot coals were usually placed on top, which of course very quickly creates a hot environment for the rats inside. From here, the rats begin frantically searching for a way out because, just like us, they have survival instincts. The metal enclosure is too hard to bite into, but a human's flesh is not. You see where this is going. I don't need to say more, but just know that it is very, very painful and horrible. And to make matters worse, this is only one of the terrible rat punishments there have been throughout history. Maybe if there's a part 2 of this video, we'll talk about another one. In our number 9 spot today, we have the brazen bull. Sometimes also referred to as the Sicilian bull, this punishment method was created by the ancient Greeks. Basically, they would start by creating a sort of device that was made out of bronze, and it was shaped like an actual bull. This bronze sculpture was large enough to fit a person inside, which is an important piece of information because that is exactly what they would do. Once the person was locked inside, a fire would then be set underneath the bronze bull. Of course, like we just learned with the rat trap, this of course would quickly create a very hot environment for the person who was inside. This time, it's not rats, but rather a human who would slowly be roasted to death, essentially in the bronze belly of the bull. Honestly, we're only at number 9 and I already feel sick, so let's keep going. In our number 8 spot today, we have flaying. Well, you've probably heard this word at some point or another, so do I really need to explain it? I guess that's my job, so here goes. Flaying is skinning. It's a slow and extremely painful method of removing skin from the body, usually with the attempt to keep it all intact. Yeah, I think that was probably too much information. Ew. In the early ages, this was a popular method of punishment or a means by which to get a confession, and depending on how far they went, the person may live after or not. It is said that this was a very famous method used in Mesopotamia. Sometimes instead of good old skinning, they instead would remove chunks of flesh. I'm honestly not sure which seems worse. I guess there doesn't have to be a winner, it can just all be bad. Everything on this list is terrible, it's in no particular order. How could I possibly rank these? In our number 7 spot today, we have the breaking wheel. Alright folks, buckle up for this one that was once used as a method of capital punishment. This method was most commonly used in Europe from antiquity through the Middle Ages and into the early modern period. This was a super simple device and it really was just a wheel, but boy, this one was terrible. There are 2 different methods with the breaking wheel. Either the person would be broken on the wheel or by the wheel. So basically, excuse the gruesome descriptions, but if you were broken by the wheel, basically you'd just be placed belly down on a board and then the wheel was slammed down twice on each arm and leg and then on your spine. You'd then be tied to the wheel and hammered to a pole, and the pole would be put up for the victim to be left there to die. Yeah, I know, I said it was gruesome and we still have another one to get through. Being broken on the wheel involved the limbs of the victim being tied to the wheel and then smashed with a club, and in some places the wheel would spin, just to add a little extra terribleness. The number and the sequence in which the smashes were distributed were not random, however, as they were actually determined in court at sentencing. Alright guys, we're almost halfway, so let's keep trucking along. In our number 6 spot today, we have death by boiling. Not to be confused with being cooked alive in the bronze bull, this is similar but very different. Possibly worse, but again, who knows? How could we possibly tell? This one is exactly what it sounds like, but it could involve either water or oil, and that is one where I feel like I can tell which one would be worse. I'm gonna say oil. I mean, you know when you're frying something up on the stove, you either come prepared with a shield for the popping oil or it's every man for themselves. Trying to make a dumpling is now a job for only the SWAT team. This one actually wasn't a super popular method, however, and you wanna know why? Not enough blood. Okay, yeah, sorry Jigsaw, next time we'll get right on that for you. In our number 5 spot today, we have the rack. This one is probably one of the most popular on this whole list, which I can't even believe I just said. Basically, the rack was a device that was made out of a wooden rectangle as a frame. The person being punished would have their limbs attached to 4 sides with chains, and then the people doing the punishing, with the help of rollers and pulleys, would stretch out the person till either their limbs were torn clean off from the body, or they just got pulled out from their sockets and couldn't be used anymore. I literally got goosebumps typing up this script. I can't imagine being around in a time when people used to do this. And sometimes it would be like in the town square. Imagine you're just trying to get some fresh air, but as you're strolling you just happen upon this terrifying scene. I don't know you guys, this list is just the worst. In our number 4 spot today we have crucifixion. This one is obviously quite well known because of its religious affiliations, as this is what is said to have been done to Jesus Christ. This method of punishment involved the person being nailed to a large wooden block, or in the case of Jesus, a cross. After being nailed to this block, the person is then left out in public for people to be able to witness the slow and painful death they are about to experience. Although the story of Jesus has made this form of punishment well known in our modern society, it was actually very popular, and there were many more people who were unfortunately subjected to it. Part of the reason for its popularity was because of the terror it created and the fear it instilled in people who broke the law. I mean, I'm sure there was at least one person who thought twice about committing a crime after seeing a public crucifixion. In our number 3 spot today we have sensory deprivation. We've talked about quite a few physical punishments from history today, but those are not the only kind, so let's take a second to talk about a messed up form of psychological punishment. This specific punishment is often referred to as white torture, and it is a type of sensory deprivation done to prisoners. This is when their cell, clothes, and even their food are entirely white. All of the guards wear white, all of the lights are on 24/7, and no one speaks any words. This is to take away as much sensory stimulation as possible. One of the most famous cases of this was that of Amir Fakhravar, who was subjected to this sort of thing for 8 months in 2004. After his release, even he himself stated that he was just not a normal person anymore. Surviving some of the other punishments that we've talked about today would certainly leave someone with physical scars, but this one would leave you with scars that can't be seen, and those are just as bad. In our number 2 spot today we have burning at the stake. Ah yes, fire. The red flower, as they call it in the Jungle Book. In the early ages, people loved a good fire, and I'm not talking about the nice one we all sit around with our friends and family while we make s'mores and recant old tales. No, of course, I'm instead talking about burning someone at the stake. Made famous by the multitude of witch hunts and trials of the past, burning someone at the stake was a popular form of punishment for those who were accused of treason or witchcraft. It was popular for reasons similar to crucifixion because burning someone at the stake was both a spectacle for the dark souls who would want to watch something like that, but it was also a warning to all those out there. In our number 1 spot today we have sawing. Okay, this one pretty much always ended in death, so buckle up. This method was used in different portions of the world, but was mostly seen in Rome, Spain, and some portions of Asia. This is another straightforward one, unfortunately. This would be done to a criminal who had been given the sentence of capital punishment, and it basically just involves them getting sawed in half. That's it! I'm not exactly sure what else to say, to be completely honest. It is said that sometimes the sawing was transversely and sometimes it was lengthwise, and to that I say, does it even matter? There's a weirdly detailed history about this one, so I think we can all just take a moment of gratitude that these don't exist anymore and that we don't do this, because it sounds absolutely terrible.